Hello, beautiful human, and welcome back to Idea Sex, where we try to make sense of the human experience through the intercourse of ideas. Today, I wanted to talk about what we've been dancing around for the past 10 videos, which is this. This is the search history for the term spiritual awakening over the past 15 years. And I find the implications of it interesting, but before we jump straight to the land of conclusions, let's consider the possibilities. I'm going to put the SEO hat on for a minute here and say that one of the most important things to consider when conducting keyword research and analyzing trends is what we call search intent. In other words, what is the intention someone has when they're searching for a certain term? What is it they're looking for? And when it comes to spiritual awakening, I have 3 ideas. But if you have other ideas, as always, I would love to have idea sex with you in the comments. 3 possible reasons why this trend exists. Possibility number 1, there's simply a growing interest in spirituality. Spirituality is now mainstream to the point of being commoditized. Office yoga is a thing. We have 1,000,001 apps for mindfulness. And I've shared this stat before, that the meditation market is estimated to grow to $2 billion. $2 billion by 2022. You can pay someone a lot of money to learn how to sit and breathe. And actually, if we look at other spirituality related terms, we'll see there's generally an upwardish trend, and things relating to religion are actually trending down a little, with the exception of scripture, which is also interesting but irrelevant. In any case, if it seems like everyone you know has their religious views on Facebook set to spiritual but not religious, the search history backs that. Possibility number 2, more people are losing their shit. I'm not even making a joke. I know it's hard to tell sometimes, but legitimately for real, more people are losing their shit. This is the search history for the term existential crisis. And some people may ask, well, what does an existential crisis have to do with a spiritual awakening?
Oh, my sweet summer child.
Historically, the line between spirituality and psychosis has been fuzzy-wuzzy. Ask Joan of Arc. Let's take a look at possibility number 3, which is we are in the middle of a mass awakening. No way to prove it, of course, but let's entertain the idea. Let's try on the idea hat. And not just for an episode, as we've previously done. I'm not taking this hat off. I'm going to be wearing this hat for as long as I'm making these videos. In fact, I have a confession. The hat is the reason I'm making the videos, so it stays. I mean, I'm not going to wear the literal hat all the time because it's pointy and distracting and it makes my forehead sweat, but there you go. If you want to know more about why I subscribe to possibility number 3, do check out the article that I wrote to accompany this video. It's really long, but the link is in the description. And I think it's worth noting that if this is a thing that's really happening, it doesn't negate the other 2 possibilities. Spiritual awakening and existential crises probably go hand in hand, as we'll get into. And then there's that general growing interest in spirituality. Now, I don't think the interest is a result of spiritual awakening. I think it's the trigger. But in any case, if you haven't had this experience, I'm going to sound somewhere between pleasantly confused, like I have the nice kind of dementia, or like I escaped a padded cell. If you're currently going through this process, you may be relieved to know that you don't belong in a padded cell. And if you've already been through this process, you know that we pretty much all live in a padded cell until we wake up anyway. Which begs the question, what the fuck is a spiritual awakening? Let's talk semantics. So, people will use spiritual awakening to refer to different things, right? They may use it to refer to a midlife crisis, or when someone starts worshiping God, or when someone suddenly feels connected to something bigger. And I think any one of these things can be a spiritual awakening in the context we're using it here, but we are using it in a very narrow sense. So for our purposes, we will define spiritual awakening as the process by which we become conscious of consciousness. And we've talked about this in a previous video, and if you want to take a deeper dive, I go into it on the blog, but to summarize it here, a spiritual awakening is when we make the distinction between our egoic mind and consciousness. Becoming conscious of consciousness is the best definition I could find for this process, and it's a shitty one because you only understand it if you've experienced it. And this is the problem we run into when we start talking about things like God and intuition and mysticism. Language stops working. This is why scripture relies on parables and metaphors. This is why the best of the human experience is captured in art, especially music, because there are no words to describe that which lies beyond our traditional five senses. There is no codified language for the spiritual world. Think of it like this. There are two people. One of them has only ever eaten apples. That's it. Their whole life, just apples. And the other has only ever eaten Panda Express. We'll call these people Granny Smith and Juan Thomas. Granny is trying to explain to Juan Tom what an apple tastes like. She says it's tart. And Juan Tom asks her what that means. What does tart taste like? And Granny hems, and she haws. And then she says, well, I guess it's somewhere between sweet and sour. Juan Tom now thinks apples taste like orange chicken. And this is often how it feels to talk about spirituality, because our perception of words, when we can't point to something in the physical world, so when we say God, right, we could mean completely different things, and it's all colored by our personal experiences. So if you've eaten of the apple, wink wink, then you know what I mean when I say become conscious of consciousness. But if I were to say become conscious of consciousness to Juan Thomas, he would think I sound like a fortune cookie. And so here we are trying to talk about spiritual awakenings. The language is already a bit of a barrier, and the experience itself appears to be highly individual. I say appears to be because everything I'm sharing today is the result of cross-referencing a metric fuck ton of materials. There's no research on this as far as I know. There's no documentation, probably because we don't even know if it's real. But because of when we're seeing spikes in search history, and because this seems to be affecting so many people, I think it's an idea worth exploring. And unlike other stuff you'll find out there on Awakening, I'm not trying to sell you on services. I'm just interested in taking a clinical look at a completely unclinical phenomenon. Because there's so much to cover, this video is going to be a high-level overview. If you want a deeper dive, check out the article. I think that's the way I'm going to do it, is like deep dives on the blog and then the shorter video summary. So on the agenda for today, we're going to take a look at common triggers for spiritual awakening, stages of a spiritual awakening, and what distinguishes a spiritual awakening from regular old life. Let's start with the millennials' most overused word, triggered. Excuse me, I think our number one word is dead. If awakening is the process of becoming conscious of consciousness, so separating out our egoic mind from the part of us that watches that mind, it follows that anything that shakes our snow globe world hard enough can trigger an awakening. In my studies of books and myths and Reddit forums, there appear to be three common triggers. 1, intense presence. This goes back to the neuroscience we talked about in the last video, where people in intense prayer and meditation experience ego death, a total but temporary loss of identity. Awakening is like a baby version of this, and it can be triggered by things like meditation, like yoga, maybe anything associated with flow states. And this is because focusing on the here and now silences the ego long enough that we notice it's gone, and therefore not us. Again, if you need better explanations, I go into more depth about it on the blog. Possible trigger number 2, a tower moment. I call this the tower moment because in tarot, the tower is a card that represents upheaval at a minimum and tragedy at the worst. A tower moment could be the loss of a job, or it could be finding your wife of 30 years in bed with your brother. It is the most feared card in tarot, and probably my second favorite because it always represents a pivotal point in our journey. Possibility number 3, psychedelics. There have been studies on how psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, has reduced fear of death in cancer patients. They don't necessarily come out of the trip believing in an afterlife, but their death anxiety is significantly reduced because they've peeked behind the curtain of life. They've glimpsed the great mystery, and what they see isn't so scary. In Stealing Fire, the book from the last episode, the authors mentioned a study in which people who achieved self-actualization, which I hypothesize is a possible outcome of an awakening, they often dabbled in psychedelics. So to summarize, a spiritual awakening can be triggered by anything that grabs our snow globe and shakes it. I wish there could be a mass survey on people who have had an awakening, because then we could get the most realistic model possible of what this process looks like. But most of what's out there on the internet is anecdotal. Again, there's no research, there's no documentation. But if we look at a lot of the anecdotes, there are some definite themes. Awakening tends to be a messy and gradual process of purging and healing. The more we fight it, the more it sucks. Physical illness can manifest even though we're not actually ill, like you go into a doctor and nothing's wrong. And many feel as though they're going crazy, dying, or are going to die soon. I think the process is similar to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, which in retrospect is probably why we started there. But a lot of people have tried to map out this process. So you'll see things like 23 stages of spiritual awakening, which is interesting, but it's a lot of times based on someone's experience. And so I cross-analyzed different models, different maps, and sort of boiled it down to 4 very basic components. Moment of awakening, dark night of the soul, the cocoon phase, also called the void or hermit phase, and rebirth. So dark night of the soul and the cocoon phase, or the void or hermit phase, those are used commonly enough by the collective that they feel established. The other 2 are my best guess. So from the top, a moment of awakening is that shaking of the snow globe. It is that first time we become aware of the division between ego and consciousness. And it appears as though people become more aware of that division as the spiritual awakening progresses. And the next-ish is the dark night of the soul. And I say next-ish because for some people it happens before, for some people it happens after, for some people it happens before and after the moment of awakening. I'm tempted to call it DNOS because my tongue is lazy, and as a business person, I like a lot of dumb-sounding acronyms like ROI and B2C and SWOT. So DNOS comes from a poem written by St. John of the Cross. He was a Christian mystic. You can check that out on the blog if you're interested. But basically, DNOS is the lowest low spiritually. It is like depression and existentialism and nihilism having a 3-way in your cold, dead heart while whispering, God is dead. You like that? In any case, the dark night is where the heaviest purging and hardest healing is done. It's where we are put through the ringer. There's this theme of like being stripped bare until there's nothing left. And at some point along the spiritual awakening journey, a lot of people will experience a loss of identity. And it's from this point that they start to rebuild. To quote J.K. Rowling, it's Rowling, by the way, not Rowling, you Americans, you. I was set free because my greatest fear had already been realized and I was still alive, and I still had a daughter whom I adored, and I had an old typewriter and a big idea. And so rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. This starts to overlap with the cocoon phase, also called the void or hermit phase, and it appears this stage is characterized by what I would call restful incubation. It's this where we shutter out the world and are just focused on ourselves. That's why it's the cocoon. And what happens when a caterpillar goes into a cocoon? That's right, it liquefies. It literally turns into caterpillar soup in a chrysalis Tupperware. Nature, what the fuck is wrong with you? This is why in shamanic rites of passage, like a vision quest, there's this period of isolation and fasting. It's death to the old self. Following the cocoon, there's a rebirth. And in the rebirth, the awakening, the awakened one, if you want to be dramatic, the seeker becomes a conscious co-creator of reality. And this warrants its own video. Probably all the stages do, but the short of it is there is some kind of significant change. And externally, this might look like a change in career, in relationships, in personality, in lifestyle, in especially life path. This is what some people would say is stepping off the fated path and onto the destined path. It is internally a new level of consciousness. Okay, so what's spiritual about this? Based on what we've covered in this video, you could choose to view this awakening thing, if it's a thing at all, as purely psycho-emotional phenomena. and not spiritual. In my humble ass opinion, it's difficult to tell where the human experience ends and the spiritual experience starts, but really what we talked about in this video doesn't sound spiritual, and it certainly doesn't sound magical. Like, this is what we humans do, right? We bump into shit, it hurts, we heal, big deal. Well, that's just the tip. There's another layer to this that is not for everyone. The rabbit hole goes deeper. It's my hypothesis that what distinguishes a spiritual awakening from regular old life is the widely reported phenomenon of synchronicity. Synchronicity is a term coined by Carl Jung, and it basically refers to coincidences that aren't necessarily coincidences. There's some other guiding force at play, and his research is what we will be diving into next time. So if you made it this far, consider subscribing, because we are going to be getting into the juicy stuff, synchronicity and other psychic phenomena. And I put psychic in air quotes because I think science is just starting to catch up to what human intuition has known all along. So in future videos, we'll be looking into the research behind some of these phenomena, and not just pseudoscience, but, you know, government-issued documents. Ooh, yeah, I'm excited. So, you know, all things that I think show us God, universe, source, spirit, whatever you want to call it, it's real, it's good, and it is accessible to us in this lifetime, while we're meandering around in these little human suits. So until next time, keep the faith.